Shabbat Shalom. What happened on the morning of October 7th in Israel was horrifying. But what has happened since is both frightening and morally clarifying. There are events in world history that occur in moral shades of gray. The attack on Israel on October 7th is as clear a case of good and evil as I know of in history. So with that backdrop in mind, I want to share some thoughts about Israel, Hamas, Palestinians, and those who support the cause, and some things that I think are important for all of us to realize. The first thing is that the mantra, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," chanted by hundreds of thousands in rallies in the United States, in cities, and on campuses, those words call for the annihilation of Israel. Nothing less. That is the goal of Hamas and the large percentage of Palestinian Muslims and their supporters. That is tragic for Israel, but it is equally tragic for them, because Israel isn't going anywhere. But the enemies of Israel are clear. They are calling for the destruction of the Jewish state. Which leads me to the second realization. It's very important to realize that the supporters of the Palestinian cause who claim that their concern is for the underdog, for the oppressed, nothing is further from the truth. Let me offer you just one example. In the last 14 years, Boko Haram, an Islamic group, has murdered over 50,000 Christians in Nigeria, and 18,000 churches have been burned. I wonder how many Americans know that 50,000 Christians have been murdered in Nigeria. If we don't, and I suspect most don't, what does that tell us about our news sources? The Pope chastised Israel for killing 2 members of the church in Gaza. We are saddened by those unintentional killings. And yet, I'm simply not aware of the Pope speaking out against the deliberate murder of 50,000 Christians and condemning the Islamists who carried it out. Those who call for the destruction of Israel care little about the oppressed and very little about the underdog. Which leads me to the third realization. All of us should realize that the veil has been lifted on our universities. I have shared that for 20 years from this pulpit, and I'm very sorry to be vindicated. You have all heard the responses of the presidents of the University of Pennsylvania, of MIT, of Harvard, to the question, does the calling for the murder and destruction of Israel and the Jewish people violate your policy of bullying and harassment? Apparently, in the eyes of these presidents, it does not. Or it depends on the context. Can any of you imagine if these presidents were asked, does the calling for the murder of black students or students who identify as lesbian, transgender, or gay violate your policy of bullying or harassment? And make no mistake, sadly, these presidents represent, I believe, the overwhelming view of university presidents in America. And keep in mind, those presidents hire the deans that hire the faculty to teach your children. I want to add a thought, though, that I have not heard widely made. I don't believe those university presidents want to see Israel destroyed. I do not think they want to see Jewish students harassed or bullied or attacked. I don't believe they're anti-Semitic. I think they are weak. I think they are weak people who live in fear. They make their decisions based on the fear of Palestinian students, fear of Muslim students, fear of other students who openly hate Israel, fear of their faculty, fear that they will lose dollars that are coming from Arab countries. And there's a very important lesson here. When decisions are made based on fear in almost any arena, usually they are the wrong decision. The question to ask is simply this: what is right? Not who will I offend, what will be the repercussions, or what am I most afraid of? That's what weak leaders ask. President Roosevelt's famous line, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself," was prescient. And I think what will be of interest to you is that the phrase most often repeated in the Bible by God is al tira, do not fear. More than any other words, that is what God said. Which takes me to a realization for some about world opinion. For decades, the United Nations, where the world gathers to express its opinion by vote. Here's an interesting thing worth noting. Since 2015, the UN has adopted 140 resolutions condemning Israel. In that same period, over the last 8 years, it has passed, are you ready for this? A total of 68 resolutions condemning the rest of the world combined. So let me understand. There is one democracy in the Middle East, surrounded by many countries run by tyrants, and the United Nations passes more resolutions criticizing Israel than all of the other countries of the world combined? And you want me to look to the United Nations and world opinion? The entire world can be wrong. Which takes me what we need to realize about war. Those who start wars, those who did what Hamas did to innocent human beings, do not have the right to tell others when to stop. It doesn't work that way. It is painful to see the suffering in Gaza. I don't know any Jew that doesn't internally weep for what is happening. But the responsibility for this lies with Hamas. As I have heard it said, if the enemies of Israel put down their weapons tomorrow, there would be peace in the Middle East. If Israel put down her weapons, there would be no more Israel. You want peace? It's offered. The next thing I think we need to realize is Israel's neighbors. There are 23 Arab countries. There are 49 Muslim majority countries. Think about that just for a moment. 23 Arab countries, 49 Muslim majority countries, approximately 2 billion Muslims on this planet. And they cannot tolerate one Jewish country of 7 million people. In fact, by the way, there's something like 195 total countries in the world, and only one needs to justify its existence: Israel. The enemies of Israel, well, this speaks volumes about their values. And finally, for now, a realization about some whom many thought were the allies of the Jewish people. Many thought that these groups would at the very least immediately condemn Hamas. But tragically, they have not. I don't often agree with Rabbi Sharon Brous in her public criticism of Israel. And yet, in today's Wall Street Journal, I think it was the online edition, there's a piece about her And this is what Rabbi Brous says. Brous admits that she has been horrified by efforts to defend Hamas among groups she had thought were allies that, and these are her words, are a retrograde, totalitarian, misogynistic terror regime, has become a hero of the left, has rudely awakened her to the very deep roots of anti-Semitism. That's Rabbi Brous, and I know that she's not alone. Black Lives Matter grassroots chapter posted, quote, these are the words, "We must stand unwaveringly on the side of the oppressed. When people have been subject to decades of apartheid and unimaginable violence, their resistance must not be condemned but understood as a desperate act of self-defense." The National Women's Studies Association, NWSA, which according to their website is the largest network of feminist scholars, educators, and activists in the country. In other words, no group has more feminist scholars and women's studies professors than the NWSA. One would think, given the unspeakable atrocities Hamas continues to perpetuate against women, they would be the first to rise up and condemn them. But they have not condemned the attack on Israel. CARE, the Council for American Islamic Relations, read what they have written and listen to their leaders. There are many other groups as well. I say this with great sadness, but for many in the Jewish community, it is an awakening. And if you have involvement with those groups, I hope that you'll influence them. I hope you'll shape them. I hope you'll let them know how you feel, but I wouldn't give them a penny until they hear your thoughts and your voices. And in contrast, by the way, on October 11th, 3 days later, there was a public statement by another group. I'm going to read you just the first paragraph. "In the wake of the evil and indefensible atrocities now committed against the people of Israel by Hamas, we, the undersigned, unequivocally condemn the violence against the vulnerable, fully support Israel's right and duty to defend itself against further attack, and urgently call all Christians to pray for the salvation and peace of the people of Israel and Palestine." The letter gets better, but I'll tell you this, it is signed by 2,000 evangelical pastors, ministers, and church leaders. Whether or not you and I agree with evangelicals on other issues, it's not pertinent at the moment, because I believe it is incumbent upon me and truthfully on all of us to recognize and be grateful for their support. There's so much more I want to share with you, but understandably, under the constraints of times in the service, I'll simply say this. A few thoughts of what we can all be doing. We can continue to financially support Israel. Seek out others who share your views. We all need support. There are millions of Jews who feel the way you do, and tens of millions of Americans who stand beside us. To our students, some of you are here, I hope many of you are listening. Turn to your Hillels. Turn to groups like Stand With Us, who spends a lot of time and resources on campus. Turn to us, your clergy at Stephen Wise Temple. Reach out to us, we are with you. And here's something very encouraging that just happened in the last week. Lawsuits have been filed against NYU and against Penn from one of the most powerful law firms in the world. They are being sued for discrimination, for not protecting Jewish students the way they would protect others. And there will likely be more lawsuits at more universities. And can I say this? Be proud of your temple. Be proud of Stephen Wise Temple. Since its founding and until today, it remains passionately Zionist. The day after the attack, October 8th, there were 2,000 people in this room, and there would have been thousands more undoubtedly were we not constrained by the fire marshals. volunteer in Israel. Rabbi Zweiback is leading a mission February 5th. You can go for a week and volunteer to help Israelis in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. And I'll simply leave you with this. It occurred to me that the words we were chanting just before I began this sermon were Ve'al Kulam. For all these things, for all these blessings, may God's name be forever praised and blessed. There's a message there. We can and should feel sad. We can and should feel angry, but we cannot despair. Israel, like the students who spoke here, is strong and resolute. Our people are strong, and with God standing alongside us, we will look forward to a future that our beloved Israel and we all richly deserve. Shabbat Shalom.